Hey everybody, I'm Paul Cram, talking today a little bit about In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. Um, I don't know. I don't know. My book club read the book. I just kind of spoiler alert, I guess, is what I should say, because I am going to talk a little bit about some of the obviously the themes in the book, but also some of the things that happen toward the end. So just be forewarned, there's probably some spoilers if you have not already read the book. But I did want to just read really quickly the back of it. On November 15th, 1959, in a small town of Holcomb, Kansas, four members of the Clutter family were savagely murdered by blast from a shotgun held a few inches from their faces. There was no apparent motive for the crime. There were almost no clues. As Truman Capote reconstructs the murder and the investigation that led to the capture, trial, and execution of the killers, he generates both mesmerizing suspense and astonishing empathy. In Cold Blood is a work that transcends its moments, yielding poignant insights into the nature of American violence. Um, yeah, I have to say that I don't generally read true crime a ton, and I have a theory, and actually, you all can maybe let me know if this is something that you agree with or not. But my theory is that it's not men that like true crime as much as it is women. I say this because in my circle, a lot of it's mostly the women that are talking about the true crime podcasts like Serial, and that's really popular right now, and some of those. Um, yeah, and I don't know. If you have a different experience, let me know. But that's my experience has been that women just I don't know, they just love true crime. And I don't exactly know if I know why that is per se, but I find it interesting. So obviously that's a really broad brush. Take it or leave it. I don't know if it's totally accurate, but um I'm really glad that I read it. I know like I was chatting with the guys in my book club and um the author, Truman Capote, he does a really interesting, amazing job of really empathizing with the two gentlemen who committed the murders, Perry and Dick. Like I said, there's some spoiler alerts, but yeah, Perry and Dick, they both met in prison, and what Capote does with them and dives into really their history and their background and their past. And for myself, it brought a lot of understanding, I think is maybe what the intent was a little bit. It brought a lot of understanding and empathy for where they wound up in life. Yeah, I don't really feel like this necklace is not balanced well. I don't know, the clasp on back must be anyway. Um, the but he does a good job of kind of balancing that of he's talking about cold-blooded killers, and yet we find ourselves empathizing with them somewhat, or at least I did. Um, Not for what they did, like the murders were heinous and atrocious and awful, but what brought them to that point and stuff. I think it was just there was a lot of empathy and humanization of them, um, which one of the gentlemen at book club had mentioned too, like the Clutter family, the murder victims family, the surviving relatives now, they've been very quiet and they haven't really commented a ton. I think they don't really like the book. Um, and I can see their perspective on that too. If someone that I loved and held near and dear was murdered, and having someone write a book about the murderers and place them in a light that puts them into like a empathy ridden place, I can understand that from their perspective. Um yeah. There's a couple of things that I do want to mention. I'm just going to read just tiny little snippets here and there that of things that stood out to me from this book. The Perry. So Perry is one of the gentlemen that committed the murder, and his sister. I have a few spots in here, but his sister Barbara um, wrote him a letter, and she wrote this letter to Perry, the very first time that Perry wound up in prison for stealing an automobile. And yeah, I was impressed that that Capote included it, you know. Let's see here. Dearest bro Perry, we got your second letter today, and forgive me for not writing sooner. Our weather here, as yours is turning warmer, and maybe I'm getting spring fever, but I'm going to try to do better. Your first letter was very disturbing, as I'm sure you must have suspected, but that was not the reason I haven't written. It's true that children do keep me busy, and it's hard to find time to sit and concentrate on a letter, as I have wanted to write you for some time. I love the way that she writes. I love, like, she literally includes, like, it just shows her mindset. Like, here's some statistics if you're interested. And she lists out the three kids, Freddie, the baby, and Donnie, like their height, weight, and their shoe size. And she just talks about a little bit about what's going on in her life, and she's busy. Um, but I loved her intellect and her logic. She says, "I truthfully feel none of us have anyone to blame for whatever we have done with our own personal lives. It has proven that it has been proven that at the age of 7, most of us have reached the age of reason, which means we do, at this stage, understand and know the difference between right and wrong. Of course, environment plays an awfully important part in our lives, such as the convent in mine, and in my case, I'm grateful for that influence. In Jimmy's case, he was the strongest of us all. She's referencing a few of their siblings. I remember how he worked and went to school when there was no one to tell him, and it was his own will to make something of himself. Um, we will never know the reasons for what eventually happened, why he did what he did, but I still hurt thinking of it. Um, Perry and his sister Barbara are the only two surviving kids. Their siblings, they committed suicide. So it's a really sad story, in a lot of ways for Perry's life. But I love where she goes. She's like, in your case, I don't know what your weakness is. We all have weaknesses. Um, I don't know what your weakness is, but I do feel it is no shame to have a dirty face. The shame comes when you keep it dirty. Um, in all truthfulness, and with love for you, Perry, you are my only living brother and the uncle of my children. I cannot say or feel your attitude towards our father or your imprisonment just or healthy. Um, it's a long letter, but I really like the way that she goes about it. She she goes on to kind of share some of her own in her personal life. She talks a little bit about her own weaknesses and things like that. So, um, yeah, there's something about the way that she wrote it, and I really liked it. So, something in there. I thought it was cool. Um, Considering, you fast forward and it's like that was the first time that he had really gotten in trouble. And then, Capote does a really good job of just kind of explaining before, then, now. And by now, I mean like in the when this took place. And right there at the end of in the 50s and early 60s. There's a lot to like unpack and a lot to talk about in a way. The other things that I really think are interesting is the I mean, Capote is gay. I mean, that's very well known. Um, I think that there's a lot of interesting elements that play into, like, when I was reading it, the relationship between Perry and Dick, the two murderers. Um, I kept sitting back and I was just like, huh, the way they talk to each other and their relationship was interesting the way that it was written. And I know that Truman Capote, he knew Perry and Dick very well. Like, he spent a lot of time. Apparently, Truman Capote, when he wrote this, he started writing it before the murders had been solved, apparently. And he wasn't necessarily writing it to have like resolution. He was writing it more to talk about like American crime and that sort of a thing in some of the judicial system, which he does a really good job of doing. Um, but in the midst of doing that, they actually you know, again, spoiler alert, they actually get capture Perry and Dick, and they go to trial for the murders, and they're sentenced to death. Um, but there's something about the relationship between Dick and Perry that is very, I mean, Perry and they constantly Perry refers to Dick all the time as like babe and honey, and like it's an interesting dynamic. Um, though Perry, I really don't think, like, I don't think that he was gay per se. Like he they explicitly he talks about Perry's perception of queens and what that is like. Um, I do think though that Capote, this is just my opinion, I think he really loved Dick and Perry. And maybe it got a little bit for Capote at least. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, he's gay, so he, it's just interesting. Like if an author had written this that was straight, I would be thinking the same things. Um, there is I should have highlighted this, but there's just references like this right here where Capote is talking about Perry and Dick and their trip right before they murdered the Clutters. He says the two young men had little in common, but they did not realize it, for they shared a number of surface traits. Both, for example, were fastidious, very attentive to hygiene and the condition of their fingernails. After their grease monkey morning, they spent the better part of an hour sprucing up in the lavatory of the garage. Dick stripped to his briefs. Dick stripped to his briefs was not quite the same as Dick fully clothed. In the latter state, he seemed a flimsy, dingy, blond youth of medium height, fleshless and perhaps sunken chested. Disrobing revealed that he was nothing of the sort, but rather an athlete constructed of a welterweight scale. And he goes on to describe like tattoos and the musculature and all those types of things. And I'm like, okay, that's a lot of detail. And about his physicality, which I don't know. I mean, I find it interesting, but I'm also still just like, huh. Um, and this other part when Dick and Perry, after the murder, again, spoilers, after the murder, they go to Mexico. And he writes about their experience there a lot. And he's like, they're on a boat, and while Perry's singing, there's this gentleman named Otto, who's sketching him in a sketchbook. Um, and he talks about how Perry's naked to the waist, and Perry was ashamed to take off his trousers because he had been in a car accident at one point, or not a car accident. I think Perry was the one who had been in a motorcycle accident and had some mangled legs. I can see why he's talking about it, but it just struck me as interesting that he included this part. So Otto reproduced a number of the tattoos ornamenting Perry's body, his overmuscled chest, arms, and small and calloused but girlish hands. The sketchbook, which Otto gave Perry as a parting gift, contained several drawings of Dick, nude studies. Um, I just think it's interesting that there's a lot of talk of their physical. I don't know. I don't know. It's it's not like it's a bad thing or I was gonna say bad or good. It's not really either. It's just it was something that stood out to me where I was just like, wow, Capote really, I think he really empathized with these two, and I something in the way that he writes it, I'm like, he really loves them. And there's moments where I'm like, does it go beyond just love like for human, and does it go into a bit of like romantic passionate love? And I'm like, I don't know, some of it, um or even just a lust, maybe I don't know, but that's all supposition, who knows. The other part that really stood out to me was the way that Capote wrote the entire thing. Specifically, though, what stood out to me was when he wrote about the gallows and Dick and Perry when they finally were hung, and it was just beautifully done. The whole book is beautifully done, but specifically in that moment, he really, really did a wonderful job of sharing the experience because he was there, but also showing how, these two murderers, how they faced death themselves it was very different, but they faced it very with a certain resolve and with a certain level of acceptance almost as if they were like, well, we are deserving of this in a way, and we're facing this. I don't know. There was, especially I thought Perry says, I didn't mark that part, but Perry says, Dick gets hung first, dies, and then Perry is hung. And before they hang Perry, he said something to the effect of, he's like, I know that this is going to come off slightly blasphemous in a way or something like that, but he's like, I am sorry for what he did. And I think that what it made me think about, or just really made me think about, because right after that, in the chapters coming right after that, Capote shows how, like, the children of the police officer detectives, how the young boys had grown up and they were in college after, once, he was just he did such a beautiful job of showing how time had passed, from the time that the jury had, ruled that they should be, um, killed for, oh my gosh, what is the word for that? The death penalty, the death penalty. Like, how much time after the jury had decided that, how much time passed before the death sentence was actually carried out. And that's something for myself that I think is worthy of attention and worthy to be talked about. And I feel like Capote was kind of pointing in that direction, how he wrote it as well. Because, like, on death row, he vividly describes what death row was like as an experience. And it's inhumane. It's so not humane whatsoever. And I think that, like, especially here in America, like, we have this long drawn out system where you're on death row. And I think oftentimes in death row you're in solitary confinement. They were Perry and Dick were in solitary for the duration of their death row time. And for me personally, like, hearing how they faced their own death, like how were able to, specifically with Perry, how he was able to, um, say he was sorry and then face the judgment, the justice of the judicial system. Um, there was something. I guess that's actually the word that I'm thinking is there. It was just that justice was served, and it's troubling to me that, in our judicial system, like, the jury of peers decided that, yes, you are guilty of murder, and the death penalty is what the sentence is. Um, and for Perry and Dick to, th- keep living and living and living and living, but in this solitary confinement sort of a way. Um, there's something really cruel about that to me, where it's like, um, I want to say that it was only several years until, and I don't know. I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but, hopefully my point is understood, which is, um, yeah, I think that having people on death row for an extended period of time is cruel. Um, I understand that there's situations where, people are wrongfully accused and, like, they need to do appeals and things like that. So I'm not claiming to have an answer for this, but I really appreciated how Capote, um, dealt with showing just how much more life continued after their death sentence, and how, life continued outside of the prison for the people that were involved, and how much life was ended for the people that were murdered. It's just beautifully done. Um, yeah, so I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, feel free to comment or let me know. I am not trying to like say like I have an answer. I really feel like that death row in and of itself, holding people in solitary confinement for such a long period of time is not okay. I do think that if you can't tell already, I do think that the death penalty in certain circumstances is just, and it is something that, I mean, in this instance too, there's not really a question so much that they did it, that they did these heinous murders. Um, it's pretty clear that they did. So yeah. I don't know. Anyway, it's an interesting book. I'm kind of going off there, but I highly recommend it. Obviously, I think the true crime aspect is really intriguing. I think the interrelationships between the author, Truman Capote, and the murderers was a bit fascinating. I do find the gay element to be very intricately interesting, but very intricately woven through the tapestry of everything in the book. And I think it's really fascinating, and it's intriguing how it makes me curious to know a little bit more about Truman's relationship with the prisoners and just things like that. It's just like what how that all influenced his perspectives and things like that. So I highly recommend, if you like true crime, take a look at In Cold Blood. If you don't like true crime, I still kind of recommend it. I think, um, you know, I lean a lot towards nonfiction books that aren't true crime. I lean more towards like, books that are like how to and self-help and things like that. So this was a little bit outside of my general wheelhouse, which is really cool. So, um, yeah, yeah. Anyways, true crime. Not sure how much more of it. I don't know. I think I'll probably pick up more true crime, but maybe not for another couple of months. Yeah. If you guys are reading anything interesting, let me know. I'd be curious. I'm always looking for a good read. Yeah. All right. I appreciate it. Hopefully you guys did too. Okay. Bye.